Hello, and welcome to Off the Roll. I'm your host, Troy Hirschman. It's been a while. I didn't even really announce that we were going to have a summer vacation. It just kind of happened. So I know it's been a long time, but today I'm going to make up for it because we have a really great guest in Scott Knerr. Scott's an athletic trainer that graduated from Ball State University in 1995, and he's had a really unique pathway in his career. And I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to let him talk about it. But this is a great story of pathways, a little bit of romance, some redemption, and then Scott kind of getting back on his Midwestern roots a little bit. But it's a good hour and a half talk with Scott about what's going on, and I'll let him explain it all as we go off the roll with Scott Knerr. Okay, well, we're back after a long break over the summer. We're going to kick this season off, season 3, with Scott Knerr. Scott's a 1995 Ball State graduate. Got his master's at the University of Utah. So we're going to go off the roll with Scott. Scott, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Doing really well.
Yeah. Scott, so tell everybody where you're at right now.
We are living in Laramie, Wyoming, and been out here for about 16 years now, and total change of lifestyle from where we were at in Indiana, but it's just been a great ride out here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you the question I've asked everybody when I talk to them here on the podcast, but so how did you get started in athletic training? What kind of got you going a little bit that get you interested in doing this?
That's an awesome question. And the cool thing is all of us have our own stories about how we got here, and they're varied and different. And mine started out with a knee injury, and I was a freshman in high school wrestling and ended up tearing my ACL. But the interesting thing was tore it in November and didn't get a real diagnosis for it until it was around April. And my first interaction with an athletic trainer was Dave Kuhn, who was up in Fort Wayne at the time, and went into his clinic, and he's like, yeah, I think something's going on there. And through a course of crazy events, my pediatrician was not thrilled at all that I went to a different provider that had expertise in sports medicine. So was kind of misdiagnosed initially on and told everything was fine. And then things continued to progress negatively, but ultimately went and was able to get a definitive diagnosis. And the crazy thing was, back in the 80s when this happened, we didn't have the MRIs that we have now, and everything was clinical diagnosis, and had surgery. And as I went through the recovery process and the rehab, working with an athletic trainer, saw the impact that he had in my life. And so at that point, thinking that was a direction I wanted to go, never really got back to contact sports after my knee injury, became a manager for football. And then my senior year, going into our football coach, Leland Etzler, at Woodland High School, said, hey, I think I've got an opportunity for you that I think you're going to go crazy for. And he goes, you're still looking at athletic training, sports medicine? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, we'd like to send you to a Kramer camp. And so that was the summer of 1990, and just had a blast there. And I tell the story, so many friends, and you deal with athletes and coaches, they were all going to football camp, to specialty sports camps. And here I am going to this Kramer athletic training camp. And it was at IU, and just had a fantastic experience there. And
do you remember who were the instructors at that camp?
I can't remember who the instructors were.
Yeah.
I know Dennis Sunderman, who is an alum. He was in that group also. So that was the first time I met him.
Okay.
With it. And so we got to know each other there. And so I was thinking, 100%, we are going athletic training, no questions asked. This is what I want to do. And then before I went to Ball State, you have to have your physical to get in the dorms. And so I'm talking to my pediatrician, the same pediatrician that I had for years. And we're talking, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm going to be an athletic trainer. He's like, Scott. No, you don't. Your grades are good enough. You're smart enough. You need to be a doctor. You need to be the guy calling the shots. I'm like, yes, you're right. I need to be the guy calling the shots. And so, crazily, I thought my best route would be a biology, chemistry, pre-med triple major. And so that's what I declared going in.
Ambitious. Well, at least you didn't say like half the podcast interviewees, I was going to Ball State to become an architect. If you threw that in there, that might be even way more interesting than that. Yeah.
Oh, so first year went okay. Second year, first semester, I have a 5-hour calculus class and an analytical chemistry class. And the professor in the analytical chemistry class is so excited about everything that we're going to do from this semester. He goes, I've got this ball jar here filled with sludge that I pulled out of the river behind the building here. And by the end of the semester, you will be able to tell me exactly what is in this jar. And I said to myself, I don't care what's in your jar. We're not doing this. And so went through the process and got into the track to do my observation hours for athletic training, got to meet Tony, Neil, and Rex there, and applied for the program. And I still remember the day standing out, finishing observation hours out at football for spring ball. And we knew that they'd made decisions on who got into the program. And so there were 5 of us there. And one by one, we kind of got out the guts because it hadn't been made official to go up and talk to Rex and say, hey, did we get in? And fortunately enough, when I got in, I got a big smile from Rex. And he's like, you got in. And that's how it all started.
Yeah. So I don't know if you knew I was a Kramer Camp alum too. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. I actually went to 2 of them.
Oh, wow.
I went to East Kentucky in 1983, and Dr. Bobby Barton was the guy that was running that camp. And little did I know that guy was like it was like him and Otho Davis were like the big dudes and athlete training at that time. And then I went to Illinois State my next year, 1984, for an advanced camp. And Kathy Schneedwine was running that camp there too. And then I think there was a guy, Mike Bell from College of DuPage, and there was quite a few people there that in Illinois that were kind of big deals at the time. Again, but some snot-nosed high school kid, I didn't know any better. I look back now, but the 2 consistencies of those Kramer camps was Jim Dickerson. Jim was at both of those camps, running both of those camps for Kramer, and had remembered me from the previous year at Eastern Kentucky. And I was the youngest kid at that Eastern Kentucky camp. It was between my 8th grade and freshman year.
Oh,
and
wow.
Jim and I grew up in the same area. So Jim had assured my parents that I was not going to be like prank fodder for the older kids. And they did. I mean, I remember distinctly like one night they taped some poor kid in a chair in his underwear and put him in the hallway at Eastern, taped his mouth shut. I mean, there was like, stuff that you couldn't do today and get away with it. But I never got messed with. And I told Jim when I came to Ball State that, I remembered you from Kramer camps. And then he goes, yeah, I told your mom and dad you were going to get messed with. You were going to get terrorized on this camp for that. But I think that's the thing. Those Kramer camps, there was a lot more value in those camps, which is why when I got to Ball State, I continued those on because I felt like when you're in high school, you just want to learn how to do things.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to touch something and do something with it. And especially athlete training, nobody else knew how to do that. I'm sure that when you went back to Woodland, they were like, you were the guy. I mean, right? I mean, other than Dave, did Dave come out there to Woodland and help out a little bit?
Dave was never signed out there. It was Joe Bear, my
Okay.
senior year,
Yeah.
started coming out with
Yeah.
it. And we made jokes later on that the days that he would show up, it was like Santa Claus was coming to town. And everybody in the middle of football practice, it was like everything stopped because everybody was so excited that Joe was there. And the other big thing that I remember with that, along with the stuff that I learned, was seeing my first cell phone that
Oh,
was in his side satchel. That was just this huge thing. But the fact that he had a cell phone with him was cool for me to see.
yeah.
And
Doctors get pagers back then. Athletic trainers got cell phones.
Yep.
Because you probably had to be in two different places at once, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So you get into the program at Ball State. Who do you get in with? Who's in your class when you get in that class? Because it's what,
Oh,
19. So you graduated from high school in what year?
91.
91. And
And so,
so you spent that freshman year observing and stuff. You got in. Did you get in this in the
it would
fall?
have been the fall of 94 was my first year
Okay.
in there. And the class that I ended up graduating, the three of us, it was myself, Chris Lane, and Brian Jones were the ones that actually graduated together. Mike Miller was close in there, but I think for some reason he was just a little bit behind us, if I'm remembering.
He's a little bit behind everybody. You hear that, Mike? You can come at me now.
Yeah, but Mike and I got into a lot of trouble along the way. So
No, no,
yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
never. Not Michael. No.
Oh,
Yeah, he
so
didn't he didn't mention any of that in his podcast. So
oh,
yeah,
have to ask him about the Vegas trip for his 21st birthday that we took.
well, we're on a podcast. I mean, you can keep it PG. It's okay.
Uh,
Let's hear about it.
so it was our senior year, and it's right before spring break, and he says my parents are taking me to Vegas for spring break, and I can bring somebody. You want to come along? And I'm like, you're kidding me. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so we get on the plane, and his dad said, I'll pay for everything once we get there. And I'm like, dang, okay. So Mike says to his dad, how about drinks on the plane? And his dad's like, no, no, no. And Mike's like, come on, it's 21st birthday trip. And his dad caves. And we started drinking then. And it was, I don't know that we ever stopped until we got off the plane 3 days, 4 days later with it. And oh, it was something else. Just again, parts of it are a little bit of a blur. I'm not going to lie with
Yeah.
that, but no, trying the two of
But
us.
so when you saw The Hangover, you're kind of like, yeah, I can relate to that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no lions or Mike Tyson involved, but there were some interesting things that happened along the way. And these two 21-year-old wide-eyed kids from the middle of nowhere, Indiana, hanging out in Vegas, just two of us, not knowing what we were doing. And I looked young when I was 21. And there was this casino, just this little casino there. And I remember I hit a slot machine, and this woman was convinced that I had a fake ID every time I walked in. And so, yeah, that was a challenge there. So, but no, it was a good time and just hanging out and going to shows with his parents and
Yeah.
smoking cigars. And no, it
Yeah.
was a good time.
It was a typical 21st birthday trip.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
with Miller, which you like needed to hydrate up to keep up. I can't imagine what Miller would have been like in college, trying to with all that energy that he has
Yep.
to do all
Yep.
that. So you had to keep up. Good for you.
Yep.
Holy
No,
smokes.
it was good.
Yeah. So so what sports did you work in your time when you were at Ball State as a student?
Um, First semester I was with um, women's volleyball, and
Which back then was it going to be a good rotation?
yeah,
Was it in the season? Was it in season?
yep, it was in season. It was when
Yeah.
Chad was the head coach
Yeah.
there, and um, so yeah, no, it was a good experience. It was Anita Bowman that I was with, and so she was a GA at the time, and so I learned a lot from her. It was a good experience, and no, the team was definitely it was a good team then.
Yeah.
And so then I am trying to think for the life of me, and I can't think what I was spring of my first year with that. But then, because I think everything was football, fall of '94 overshadowed everything just because it was so intense. And that probably had the biggest impact for me of anything, being able to be involved in that. And then spring of my senior year, it was an internship with Dr. Jones down at the Anderson Clinic,
Okay.
which was fantastic. So that means spring of my first year, it was field hockey, working by
Okay.
myself. So,
Yeah. Oh, working by yourself. Ooh.
yes. Yep. So,
Was Fitz was still there, wasn't she?
yep. Yep. She
Yeah.
was. And yeah, it was interesting because I knew nothing about field hockey, and the amount that I learned about low back, hip overuse stuff was huge
Yeah.
then. So that was a big take home with that, and I had, like I said, no idea what I was getting into um, with that, but definitely learned a lot. And being on my own was a good challenge there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um so that 95 year 95 fall you were with field hockey, 95 spring you were at CIO Anderson with Dr. Jones, who
Mm-hmm.
recently retired, by the way.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew that or not, but
No,
yeah,
because, well, yeah,
I think
30 years, that
yeah,
doesn't seem possible.
I think he's still helping out with Lapel, so I see him once a year, at least once a year, or I'll continue to see him. I know that when I talked to him last, that was his plan, was just still help out with Lapel High School with football and stuff. So, um, I hope he does. I mean, because you got to still kind of keep your hand in a little bit of something.
Yeah.
So, um, so 95 comes around. I am getting ready to leave the University of Utah. Because I'm ready to come back to the Midwest. And Tony calls me and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm coming back." And I said, and talking to Bill, I mean, they were trying to hire me as a full-time person, but I've said,
Mhm.
no, I'm not doing that. So they were going back to the GA route, and they wanted to have some consistency. And obviously Bill was impressed with the Ball State program from that standpoint. So I remember talking to you that spring of 95. And so
Mhm.
let's talk about that. What other options were you looking at? What was kind of your idea or plan at that point in time? And then maybe what helped you make your decision to come out to Utah?
Um, I had been looking at big football programs because I was going big D1 football was what I was thinking. And so had looked at Auburn, had looked at Michigan. I mean, some big football programs. And talking with Rex, he's like, yeah, let's make this happen. And talking to Tony about your experience and this position opening up, I thought, well, let's give it a try. Let's at least fly out there because Bill was wanting to bring me out to meet everybody, which, I thought was pretty cool. And so flew out there, met with Bill. You drove me all around. And I remember me asking you a lot of questions about your experience and what you got out of that route and what you did. And I remember you saying to me, basically, you've got to do what's right for you, Scott, and you've got to figure it out. And that was a turning point for me. It was huge because it set the tone for what I did for basically the rest of my career in college athletics. Never really worked football, never really worked basketball. It was the experience I had at University of Utah as a GA with Olympic sports that made me think there is a need for good athletic trainers working Olympic sports because everybody that I'd seen up to that point with Rex, Neil, and Tony, they were all involved in basketball and football. And so I thought every good athletic trainer, if you're top notch, that's where you're going. And then realized that there was a place for me in Olympic sports. And so, yeah, it was huge when I gained there professionally, and just the people at Utah, I still laugh and smile thinking about all the silly things that happened there. And this was a time when, as a GA, you went to your classes, but it was all about the work in the training room.
Yeah.
And that's what I was there for. The master's degree, I knew I needed to have, but it was the experience that was what I wanted. And spending the hours in the athletic training room, working with the athletes, learning from Deb, Gerald, and Bill, anything that I could, it was huge. And you felt like you were part of the team. You didn't feel like you were a GA. You felt like you were there doing a job, and you knew you didn't have the experience that they did, but at the same time, they never made you feel like you were lesser of a clinician, lesser of anything. We always felt like we were just part of the crew, which was awesome from that experience back then.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what made it. I mean, we both came from an undergraduate program that was very similar in that, even with the students, and some of the relationships that you had with, the relationships that you had with Rex, Tony, and Neil. It was, I mean, you knew that you weren't an equal, but they definitely made you feel like you were part of the process of their success. And they kind of groom that, I guess, in you. And then you make this transition to Utah. And I remember Bill telling me, and maybe he told you the same thing. He goes, as long as I'm not getting calls from the head coach, you're good. I don't need to tell you every day that you're good. I trust you that you're going to be okay. And that first year for me, yeah, he got some calls from Greg. and probably the same way with you your first year there. But the thing is that they're always like, I never worried about, I only had a fleeting worry that first year I remember when Greg called him in the gym on that little tan phone because I told him I had a class during gymnastics practice, and we hadn't even started practice yet. And he called Bill and says, "This is not going to work." I thought, "Oh crap, I'm going back to Indiana. I haven't even really started school yet because they were on quarters." And
Mhm.
and uh and I just remember going talking to Bill, and Bill's like, "You're good, man. Don't worry about it. You are good. Greg's an asshole, you know, and you are good." So the feeling of that Bill was going to try to stick up for you as much as he could,
Mhm.
um, and make things work for you, um, gave you a solid feeling that you could learn and make some mistakes and do some stuff. Now, obviously, in your case, you had to make a switch midway through your GA
Yep.
position, but it turned out pretty doggone good if I remember right. So you want to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that? Yeah.
And so it was a tough year that first year. And I had to change my major before classes started because um, I started out exercise physiology, and Greg's like, that's not going to work. And so I'm like, okay, so I guess we'll do sports management. And so I had to go through that whole process. And luckily, like you say, with quarters, we didn't start classes until end of September. So there was time because we got there in August when we're working through stuff. But so yeah, made a lot of changes with things and tried to adapt and tried to do everything that I could. But, you know, it just wasn't a fit. And so I remember Greg bringing me into his office and say, "Hey, we both know this isn't working out. This is probably a relief to you to tell me that, for me to tell you that we're going to make a switch for you." And like, okay, well, what does that mean, making a switch? I mean, and so I was nervous then. And then um, talking to Bill, he's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." He goes, "But we'll switch you to soccer." And um, totally different experience with soccer. Felt like part of the group, felt like the coaches would listen. And with Amy and Jim, um, younger coaches, um, learned a lot about communication and how to work with a coach and feel like that you were on the same team and working together. So um, that was huge, having that opportunity and that switch. And again, at first, it seemed like I was this huge failure, and um, I kind of felt like a disappointment a little bit, and closed myself off, especially from Tony and everybody, and just um, and it wasn't until um, NATA came to Salt Lake right around, and it was probably 96, I think, but I can't swear to it, 96, 97. And that was the first time that I'd really talked to Tony since that switch. And he's like, "Man," he goes, "I felt bad about it." And he goes, "Nobody thinks any less of you. Nobody sees you as a failure." And that was huge for me to hear that from Tony because it weighed on me that I didn't go out and finish what I had planned to.
Yeah.
But
And I never thought so either. I did not. I mean, I don't know if I ever told you that or not, but I knew the stakes were. I knew who you were working with,
mhm,
and it's it the yeah why it worked for me. I mean, after that come to Jesus meeting that I had with Greg, um, I'll never know. He never said, but it was enough. Now, I will say this: Meredith King, Paul Civic, now who's the
mhm,
head women's gymnastics coach at Ohio State. I've gone to a couple meets, and she was the whole instigator of that meeting, and we've laughed about that now to the point where she goes to the athlete trainer that she works with at Ohio State, and she goes, "I was horrible to him." I was absolutely horrible to him. Almost got him. He was ready to go home, and I was horrible to him. And I go, "Listen, we were both learning, and that's part of being young and learning." And I think that's the thing where when you have a situation that doesn't fit you and you get a kind of a grace period to do something and you can work through those feelings of like what you just talked about. I mean, I'm sorry you felt like a failure. We probably all should have reached out a lot quicker to tell you that that you're not. Um, but we're young too and busy
Right.
and not. But the thing is that I think your experience at Utah was not so much you learned a lot in athletic training, but it brought you to somebody else that really changed your whole life, right?
Yes, that is very true. And you actually knew her before I did, obviously. But
Yeah, her and her little pole trick was I always thought that was amazing. Yeah, yeah.
let's call it a broomstick trick because pool
Broomstick.
trick.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Forgive me on that. Yeah, we can edit that out if we want to, but yeah, broomstick trick. Yes, yes. Okay, there we
But
go.
she, yeah, she had this ability to take a broomstick, and her shoulder mobility was crazy, and she still has long arms and was able to go and step through a broomstick and bring it all the way back around her back of her body. But yeah, that was quite the party trick. And so yeah, Jen, I actually met her my first day in the training room, which was the first day that I actually got to Salt Lake. And she'll tell the story that she thought I was just this goofy, dopey GA. And I don't know if you remember the 2-layer shorts, the mesh shorts that they used to have.
Yeah.
I had some that I had gotten specially um, to go to Utah. The top layer was red, and you could see 2 inches of a layer of black underneath it. And I thought they were the coolest shorts ever. And she thought they were stupid. And so that was the first impression I made on her were these stupid shorts. And she shared that story a few times. But yeah, Jen, you want to talk about dedicated student and being on top of it and knowing what she wanted to do and how she wanted to do it. And I think she still had this tendency, even back then, you would be able to tell me, because she told it like it was. And
Oh
she
yeah,
wasn't
that's what I was
afraid
gonna say. Yeah.
to stand her ground with it. And to this day, she is like that. And my daughter, who's now um, 20, is exactly the same way with it. And so that's one of the things I've always admired with her in the field and in life is Jen's ability to tell a coach, this is how it is. And yeah, back with the internship program at Utah, the students had so much responsibility.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And she was with swimming. And then when I got there, she was 2 years with softball, and not always easy for her, but with the support of Deb and Gerald, especially, because over in the other building, yeah, she did a fantastic job there. And yeah, Camp Carbon. Did you ever go to Camp Carbon?
Oh yeah. I've got stories on Camp Carbon. Yeah. Yeah, that if you listen to Bill's podcast, there's some in there. There's some of them I can't tell. There's some of them that yeah, I can't tell those stories on something that's going to be out to the public, but yeah, that was crazy enough in itself. I mean, it was I think one of the stories I can tell is I don't know when you were there if they still did the whole 10-gallon water dumping on unsuspecting people. The
Yeah.
best story I can tell with that is that we had this one kid that that was kind of cocky and like you're never gonna get me, da 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 da, blah blah blah. And we were that hallway where you came out to the field. You know, they had a little bit of an overhang, or had the roof. You could, you had came out the doors, and then there's a sidewalk, and it went out to the football field. Um, we hauled a 10-gallon cooler of ice water onto the roof. We got up there somehow, and we had that kid pull out the Gatorade at the end of practice, and we actually marked an X on the sidewalk. And then we had the person that was going to dump it with a walkie-talkie on the roof, and then I had the walkie-talkie, and I'm sitting there, and the kid's like pulling it out, and I'm going, no, 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 now. And I will never forget it. You could see the water like coming over the roof, and the kid pulling that card out very unsuspectingly, not knowing that he's just about to get doused. If it would have gone viral on TikTok or YouTube today, because he got like, it knocked him down. It was
Oh,
so much
wow.
water so fast. And he was so mad, but he shouldn't have been bragging in the first place. That nobody, we had a way to get him, but yeah, that stuff. And I mean, the card games at night, till the wee hours of the morning, with Bill and Gerald and those guys. I mean, it was, I, I've often said about my Utah experience, when I left Ball State, I remember my mom telling me that she was worried that, and no, don't take this offensively, but she was worried I was going to go marry some Mormon girl and stay out there. That's what her biggest fear was. And when I get out there, I'm like, I'm doing stuff I never did at Ball State. Like, I mean, just not bad stuff, but just, there was some college level nefarious stuff that was going on with paid staff members, that I was like, I'm in Utah. Why? My goodness, what is going on here? And it was part of that bonding process. It was like what you just talked about. It was like you were treated as if you were another staff person at equal footing with things. And you knew your limits with Deb and Gerald and Bill. You knew where to go and to stop. You didn't carry that over, but it was a very family like atmosphere, not unlike Ball State. Like, you knew administrators, you knew Chris Hill, you knew Dr. Hill,
Mhm.
whereas you go to if you went to Auburn or Alabama or something like that, some Michigan, you might not have had those opportunities to interact with some of those people. And
Right.
and it was tremendous that you could still do that at that
Mhm.
level. But that was a lot of it. But Camp Carbon, yeah, that was the other part. Was the other story I remember was that the football managers came back, and they were just, and college kids rolling laughing, and we're like, what's going on? And like, we were just at the McDonald's drive-through, and these teenage girls are like, are you with the football team? And they're like, yeah, we're the managers of the football team. And they said, can you tell a certain assistant coach that we all said hi? We're just like, oh my goodness. And they were just like, tell him to say when we said hi, and we're going to come by football practice. And we're like, oh my gosh, what is going on with that? Yeah.
So,
I'm not mentioning names on the podcast.
um,
Afterwards, I'll tell you.
so as you talk about managers, Jen tells a story that I have always felt hard to believe. I guess there was a manager called Mr. Salty.
Oh, yeah.
Did he
Yeah.
steal a car? To your knowledge?
What's that?
She tells a story that
Oh,
he
yeah.
stole a car
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That
and ended
happened.
up in a different state or something.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yeah, he did. He just snapped. Like, he had had enough of stuff. He had had enough of being abused, and just, yeah, stole a car. I don't know if he ended up in Colorado or Nevada or something. Wendover, maybe he ended up in Wendover. I don't know. But yeah, he stole a car. Um, there was all sorts of crazy stuff going down there. I mean, you had Coach McBride one day out there coaching, and Bill and I are standing on the sidelines, and we could see the thunderstorm rolling in, like the weather rolling in, and the hairs on his head are standing up. And I go, "Hey, Bill, do you think that we need to call this one?" He goes, "No, no, no, let it hit him. It might help him out." I mean, just stuff like just stuff like that. It is. I'm like, I never, we never had. I mean, we had fun at 2 days of Ball State, but it wasn't like, it was just crazy. And I tell, my first trip down to Price was, Bill, and we talked about this on his podcast, and is Bill driving down. We're on US 6 going down to Price, and he's like, "Hey, I'm thirsty. Can you get me a road Coke out of the back there?" And I open up the coolers, and it's full of Mickey Wide Mouths. I'm like, "You want You mean these? He's like, yeah. Get one for you too. I mean, we drank them all on the way down to Price. I mean, we're drinking and driving in Utah. I did. I go, I never did this at Ball State. I mean, and the time that, he sent me, we're playing Utah State, and he had that bet with Dale Millenberger on the Utah football game. And
Mhm.
he didn't bring any boot. He didn't bring any. It was a couple. It was like 2 or 3 cases of beer for us, and a bottle of Crown Royal for Dale. And he was so confident we were going to thrash him that he didn't bring any liquor. And they were up by 10 points on us at halftime. And he sent me to the state liquor store in a state vehicle to buy the bottle of Crown Royal so that he at least had it at the end of the game if we got beat. We ended up winning. But I'm like, you want me to do what in this state vehicle? What? Go to the state liquor store and buy liquor? Yeah. It's fine. Go. So, I mean, it's just stuff like that. And so, yeah. You have any Price stories?
So one that's totally rated G, about G, Gerald. We are doing CPR training unless Chapman came down to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's after the first practice, lunch is coming up. We're trying to get this in. And Gerald is just pacing during this as we're all trying to pay attention to Les. And Les is going through scenarios, talking, and basically says, how long do we have to start CPR before we risk brain damage? And Gerald, who is so worried about lunch, just hears how long do we have and says, we've got 20, 25 minutes. And everybody's like, what? And he's like, you're not talking about till lunch? I'm like, no, we're just talking about how long we have until we risk brain issues from not starting CPR. And he's like, oh, okay. And Jen and I still joke about that if somebody's talking about a time frame, 20, 25 minutes. And so, but
yeah, that was Gerald in a nutshell, right? Wasn't it? I mean, yeah, I gotta get to lunch.
And then a McBride story. There are so many McBride stories.
Oh my
He
gosh.
was such an amazing man in so many different ways. And one day during practice, and I think Chris Fuamatu Ma'afala was a freshman. I don't know that you would have ever seen him my first year he was a freshman, but he was a running back that ran in the mid 4s for the 40 and weighed about 250 pounds.
Yeah.
So this guy was a freight train, and McBride was too close to the sideline during a scrimmage type of activity, was looking the wrong way, and Chris came full bore and just knocked him over. And it ended up in a boot. And so they interviewed McBride on the news and asked him, what's the deal with the boot? And McBride goes, it was the most amazing experience I've ever had in my life. And this is on the news. And he goes, I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I feel this rush of wind, and there's Chris, and bang! And he goes, it was freaking amazing. And so what for most coaches would have been a traumatic experience, it was near religious experience for him in some respects there, that it was, yeah. So
no, he definitely was. He was unique. So did Bill ever tell you a story about how he has his alarm clock set in his office to tell him what time practice starts?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello, who's there? Who's there?
Yeah. No. Hey, coach, it's your alarm clock. Oh crap, practice is starting. No, I mean
Yeah.
it is. And that, again, that was part of it too. That was like the bonus material. You got to work football a little bit and you got to kind of be on that crazy train that was Utah football back then. And I mean, that was, that was kind of like just right before I mean, Coach Whittingham was there. I remember him as like a
Yep. Yep.
linebacker
He was a
coach and
DB
stuff.
coach. Yep. And his
Yeah.
dad was too. But we had
Yeah.
both
Oh
of
yeah. That
them.
we called his dad Charles Bronson because he
Yeah,
was like
that's fitting.
he's a yeah, and he would get on the stairmaster, the treadmill, and like crank it all the way up like to like the topless level and just get on there and just burn out. I mean, we just watch him and go, that old dude is killing it. And so I mean it was that was the bonus material that you got to hang out with it in conjunction with working your other sports and stuff. So let's talk a little bit. We kind of got off. Well, that's great Utah track, but we got off a little bit. So you graduate get your master's at Utah,
Mhm.
meet your wife,
Yep.
and
And
you
so that was
graduate.
what the price story was about. That's how we got off on that. Was just
Okay,
that's where we got to know each other better. But yes, we ended up getting married.
yeah,
And so one 10-second story with that is I had gone to buy the ring for her because I knew I was going to propose. And I had to finance a couple $100 of it. And so you had to put down your place of employment. And I get this phone call from Gerald going, "Hey, Scott," because nobody knew Jen and I were even dating. And we're almost engaged. And Gerald's like, "Hey, what's going on here? You like buying an expensive brooch for your mom or something?" I'm like, and then he just starts laughing because I guess he probably had put it all together. But yeah.
you knew that Deb had figured it out though. You knew
Oh
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Deb at least knew.
Her antennas were always up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, but yeah, go ahead. But that's where that was leading to. But
So expensive brooch for your mom. So what did
yeah,
you tell him?
I can't even remember. I was so shocked. I think I just started stuttering and he started laughing. And I think that's where it ended because I don't think I really answered his question. But I think he got out of that conversation exactly what he wanted was to see and hear me squirm, which exactly what I did. And so, oh yeah.
So I mean, let's talk about. I mean, we got a little bit of time, so let's talk about that a little bit. How you know, little different situation, but we had a podcast with Brian Hatzel, and Brian, his wife was a women's tennis player at Ball State, and he tells the story. I don't know if he told it in the podcast, but he tells the story that like he was a GA, she was a women's tennis player. They would be in Muncie riding around, and if he thought he saw somebody, he would make her get down in the foot area of the front seat of the car. So no, it just looked like him driving down the street. He was so paranoid about that. Um, and he's often laughed about like, I knew that I'm gonna have to marry her then if I was gonna, make her do all that crap. So I mean, how do you navigate that with trying not let people figure out what's going on?
It was tough. Because in the training room we always kept it super professional.
Right.
And um there was one of the women's gymnasts that knew Jen from being in the health promotions track. And so she knew, she was the first one to know. And then gymnastics, as you know, after every home event would go out to eat somewhere. And so I started bringing Jen. So coaches and the team knew that there was something going on. But again, with
Yeah, and Greg couldn't say anything to you about that, could he?
exactly, and that was the thing. But funny enough, one of the first things he probably said the same thing to you: "Do not date the gymnast." I'm like, okay, I obeyed
Believe me,
that
I did
rule.
not want to.
Yeah,
No offense to
me
those
either.
gymnasts that are listening to this podcast, but you were all my little sisters. Sorry about that.
And so, yeah, they were totally on board with keeping it on the down low with it. And so, um, but I guess in our favor, things went. We started dating in October, and I proposed the next February. So We had Christmas break to kind of help us a little bit. But yeah, we just made sure that any hanging out that we were doing was off campus. And um, we'd done such a good job with keeping this um, quiet. Jen was traveling with the softball team, and I had given her the ring the night before, and they were at the airport, and somebody noticed her ring, and they're like, "Who in the world are you even dating?" And so her softball team had no clue that she was even dating anybody. We kept it that much under wraps. But
Kudos.
yeah, because again, we didn't want anything to seem like there was preferential treatment. But then again, I was not a direct supervisor over her. So there was nothing from that standpoint, but we just didn't, we wanted that to be our thing. And um, yeah, we ended up getting married um, during her 5th year and my 2nd year as a GA. And yeah, that was in 1996. It'll come up on 28 years now. So we must have done something right
Yeah, no.
way with it. It was one of those things, like you said. Yeah, I got a great experience educationally and professionally. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing that came out of that time that I spent in Utah was meeting Jen and having her a part of my life.
Yeah.
And so that was the blessing that I would have never expected going in. So your mom's worst nightmare was my reality.
No, and it was funny because I was so laser focused on my career anyway that was like not even in. I'm like, Mom, just relax. I'm not gonna have time for any of that stuff, and it don't worry about it. Um, because we'd always talked about like finding that right person and what God was gonna lead you to and all this other
Mhm.
stuff. And she just was. So this backstory on that is that so when I was dating my wife now, um, so I met Cindy at St. Joseph's College, and one of the deals, like we've been dating for a while, and it was over the summer. Um, I said, "Hey, you want to go with me to a family reunion? You want to go to Texas to meet my parents?" And or not, she met my parents, but my parents had moved down there, and so we went down to see where they were moving to, and there's happened to be a family reunion at the time. And I had a great uncle that lived in Logan, and he was kind of a practical joker. And so my grandmother was still alive down there, and again, uber conservative, you know, like uh, probably would be considered a bigot today in this day and age, but like like I remember one of my high school girlfriends was Catholic, and she went out of her mind on that, and I'm like, Grandma, I'm just dating her, it's okay. Anyway, so we get down there, and we're at the family reunion, and my grandmother comes up to me and pulls me aside and says, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." She goes, "I just heard that your wife is a Mormon," and I went, "No, she's Presbyterian. Who told you that?" And it was my uncle Talmadge over here laughing his rear end off. And I'm like, "Grandmother, what if it why would it matter anyway, right? Why? Why?" And she was going through all her reasons and stuff, and I'm like, "Listen, here's the deal. You different perspective, different ideas. It's fine. But Cindy is fine. Don't worry about it." And if she was a Mormon, you wouldn't have a say in this anyway. So don't worry about it. But he's the uncle that told me when I would get them tickets when we go up to Logan for gymnastics, and he'd always go, "You have the best job in the world." And I go, "Not for that reason." Not for that reason. No. Not what you think. Yeah. You try to take 20-year-old whiny girls and add them, by 12 and see how fun your job is. It was fine. I had a great time, but yeah, it was not what people thought. So you finish up at Utah
Mhm.
and you stick around Salt Lake for a little while. What are you doing there?
I'm working in a clinic. Jen's going to grad school at BYU. And so um, I don't want to say biding my time, but I knew I needed to get a job, and it was an opportunity to um, learn in a different setting. And so I was a registered physical therapist, was the company, and it was outpatient ortho PT that I was helping with. And um, so went through that for 3 years. Like I said, it was a good experience.
No outreach, none of that stuff.
I was at at a couple different high schools.
Okay.
I covered there, so it was a good experience overall. But knew that I wanted to get back into college athletics as quickly as I could. And so, Jen graduated from, well, I'll change the wording on this. She completed her coursework at BYU. She still needed to finish her thesis, and that's a whole nother story for another time.
Yeah.
There with that. But then had the opportunity to go to IPFW for about 8 years. And on my interview, I learned a lot. Joe Bear was in on that phone call, and there were some other people whose names were thrown out that either I didn't write it down, didn't write down titles, didn't understand who they were. But the thing that I learned from that interview was make sure you know titles of everybody that's on a phone call interview, because one of the questions, and I can't remember what the question was, had to do with why are you looking to get back into college athletics and why are you wanting to get back to Indiana? And my answer was because here in the state of Utah, you can't blow your nose without the permission of the PT. And I later realized that John Straisley, who asked the question, was the owner of the physical therapy clinic that ended up hiring me. And a while later, I said, I am so sorry for that. I didn't mean any disrespect by it.
Yeah.
And he goes, Scott, the fact that you weren't afraid to speak your mind about that, he goes, that's one of the main reasons I hired you. And so, but yeah, that was the beginning of 8 years in at IPFW, which was
so it's kind of back home.
Yeah. So I was pretty close there. Yeah. And so by that point, Kylie was working for ONE. Kirk Duncan was there. And so already some Ball State connections were surrounding me there.
Was Ingerman working at that time for that group, or was he kind of back in sales at that point?
I don't remember him working with us then. Yeah.
So you're at IPFW for 8 years. You're working. Were you working both men's and women's volleyball? Just women's volleyball?
Primarily, yeah, and then filling in. I mean, there were 3 or 4 of us there covering everything, and so you had your primary sports, and then helping out here and there. But yeah,
were they still Division II back then, or were they just making the jump to Division I?
My first year, they made the transition from D2.
Okay. Yeah.
With that, and so, they hired 2 of us, thinking that it was a D2 school, and then by the time classes started, we were Division I, and all the expectations changed, and trying to hire more staff, trying to navigate that first year, was interesting.
Yeah. So then, I mean, you and Jen kind of like talk about this and like, okay, because how many kids did you have during that time frame in Fort Wayne?
By 2008, we had 3.
Okay.
And the oldest, Parker, was 6, Claire was 4, and Liam was 2.
Yeah. So you kind of had a discussion that maybe you need to be closer to her family, correct?
Yes, and just that it needed to be something that was time for a change, and looking more westward was kind of the direction that we were looking with that. And there was this University of Wyoming position open, and I knew that from the WAC days and from the Mountain West that Bill would probably have some connections there. And so I applied and I said, "Hey, Bill, this is what we're looking at. Would you be willing to make a call for me?" And Bill's like, "I would love to." And
Yeah.
so he made the phone call. And ever since then, I have always had the opinion that the connections that you have open the doors to the interview. And after that, it's up to you to do whatever you can to make the impression and get the job. But it's those connections that we make along the way that open some of those doors to make that happen. And I know without Bill, I don't know where I would have sat in that stack of applications, but just the respect that everybody in the region had for him. If
Yeah.
Bill vouched for me, that opened that door to make that happen.
Yeah. So you go there in '08 as an assistant athlete trainer working what?
Um, Women's volleyball and um, tennis, but tennis was, this is back when, again, things were different. You could talk about a primary sport and a secondary sport. And so tennis was definitely the secondary sport. If somebody needed something, they'd come in and I'd help. I'd be at, home tennis matches, but um, it was women's volleyball was the gig.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're kind of at Wyoming. You're doing women's volleyball. You're with tennis as well, and then you kind of make this shift some point in time to a, a couple of different sports. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, I had done the math that over the 15 years that I'd been in Division One athletics between men's and women's volleyball, I had probably been on the sideline for about 600 games.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I was probably one of the most experienced volleyball athletic trainers at the college level. And it was time for a change. Um, and so we had graduate assistants with the wrestling team. And I talked to Ryan Pinson, and it was time to cycle through and making the decision, do we cycle through with another GA? And I said, if you're thinking about adding staff, um, I would love to make the transition to wrestling. And at the same time, our club rodeo team was transitioning into being covered through sports medicine and strength and conditioning because they'd been struggling a little bit. And if you're University of Wyoming and your mascot is the Cowboys,
Yeah.
even if the rodeo team's club, you ought to be good. And so the legislature actually voted to allocate money to pay for staffing in sports medicine and strength and conditioning. So that's kind of where that started. So I took them on both. So I went from this primarily overuse, shoulder, knee, ankle sprains, knee injuries to going where no holds barred with wrestling and rodeo. And it was scary at first
Yeah.
from a standpoint of, can I handle this? And but then as soon as I got in there, it's second nature
Yeah.
with it. It's the sports are different, the stakes are different and what they're doing, but at the root of it, you're still dealing with individuals that are injured that are struggling to get back into the lineup or back on the next horse or whatever. And so
Yeah.
it was an awesome experience, both of those, and shaped a lot of who I was. And it was just an awesome experience to be able to work with that combination because you talk to people and they're like, wrestling and rodeo. Is there anything more extreme that you could do as an
Yeah.
athletic trainer in the college setting? And yeah, it was awesome.
So what's some of the crazy injuries? I know that like Jonathan Allen, I don't know if you heard his podcast, but he does some he actually works at a bar on the weekends with live bull riding and
Oh wow.
takes care of the bull riders and stuff with that and that's kind of his side gig he's a professor at Union University in athlete training, but this bull riding was his side gig. He does some motocross. He does some extreme sports too, and he was talking about how um, this bull rider basically got stepped on and twisted on by a bull, and basically said, "I just need to go to the hospital." And he goes because he stepped on his stomach, pelvic region, and said, "I just need to go to the hospital." So, what have you kind of seen in this experience with that?
Um, One of the craziest ones was a steer wrestler. And with steer wrestling, you're supposed to have a second horse and rider that's called the hazer. And they're the ones that keep that steer kind of in line. And it was at practice, and this guy thought, I'm just going to run one without a hazer. And so he's tracking the steer, and I don't think he realizes how close it's getting to the fence panels.
Yeah,
And he um, gets off, misses the steer, but his head hits one of the steel panels and just rings. And luckily, he was okay with that. And definitely a serious concussion,
yeah,
all laceration on his head. One that I saw secondhand was um, had a guy get stepped on his head, got lucky, pretty much ripped his ear off.
wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And so I saw that right after it
That's
happened.
not in Arnheim, right?
Nope, nope, not in Arnheim at all. You know, just the biggest thing with the experience is you're watching, and especially with the rough stock, um, somebody goes down, and you can't just run out on the field.
Right,
You've got a wild animal that's out there that you have to balance the safety um, of the bull rider or bronc rider and your own safety. And so that was a different experience there with understanding that. And I guess one other different thing was had a bull rider that had an ACL that was non-existent. He knew that it wasn't there,
right,
and he didn't want to get it fixed because he didn't want to miss out on a portion of the season. And he's like, I'm tough. I'm going to ride this out, and we're just going to do whatever it takes to get through. And I said, well, after a couple months of this, I'm like, I understand what you're doing. I have no worry that you can stay on a bull for 8 seconds, but I have never seen a bull stop dead and let you get off after the 8 seconds. I said, there's going to be a time when you get thrown, and if you land funky on that knee and you can't run away, I said, you've got the bullfighters out there that are putting their lives on the line for you. And if
right.
you've got something that you know of ahead of time that puts them at risk, I said, that's another way to look at it. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I never thought about that. And so it was at that point that he went and got the ACL reconstructed, and everything went well with it. Had a fantastic recovery, but it was just the mindset of I'm going to grind this out,
Yeah,
and
cowboy
I have
up,
a lot of
right?
respect
Yeah,
for
yeah,
all those guys.
yeah. But well, that's awesome. I think that you provide a unique perspective. Like you said, Olympic sports and rodeo is not necessarily an Olympic sport, right? I mean, you have equestrian and stuff,
Mhm.
um, but you're right. I mean, I think that's the thing is that um, we're all geared towards the sports that are out there that we see, but we don't think about how we can serve. Now, I think the profession is kind of expanding out a little bit
Mhm.
to include some different things, including tactical athletic training and performing arts and all those things that we can serve those those kind of non-traditional athletes with, and I think that really opens up for our profession for people that may have an interest. In fact, Jonathan just talks about like his other one of his other gigs, he was actually in this area a couple weeks ago, but I mean he does like guard for the for the bands, the flag throwers
Mhm.
and all that stuff. Um, that go into these big time competitions in Indy and different places, and he said those are similar injuries to like cross country and more endurance type track and sports with that, and I think that's the thing is that um like you've talked about, even at the college level, most people would be like wrestling and rodeo. Gosh, you got to be busy all the time, and I'm sure you were busy,
Mhm.
but I think you get probably a better chance because those are more individual sports. You get a chance to know your athletes a little bit better than you
Mhm.
would be if you were working a team.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there is the team aspect with both of those sports at the college level, but definitely it's an individual journey that they're taking, and so yeah, that those opportunities, and again, relationships built along the way are the reason I've stayed in this profession as long as I have. It's the people
Yeah,
and the athletes, and in athletic training, you build relationships that it's impossible, I think, in just about any other setting with it, because you're there day in and day out. With some of the minor injuries, you're there for seeing somebody for a short period of time, a couple times a day, two, three times a day to get them back. And then you've got your long-term rehabs that you're spending a lot of hours over the course of months. And so, yeah, with the wrestlers, especially, awesome experiences there, getting to know them, getting to work with them and help them to the highest levels. And with wrestling, had some amazing opportunities. I was on the floor of Madison Square Garden at the NCAA championships the night one of our wrestlers was wrestling for a national championship. And you talk about an awe inspiring opportunity. I am lights are flashing. I'm walking there, that mat's elevated, and I'm just thinking, act like you've been there before. Act like this
yeah,
is just part of the day's work. And it's because of the efforts of the athletes that we work with and our little part in it that makes some of those amazing experiences happen. And so it's um I feel like I've helped a lot of athletes, but there's a heck of a lot of athletes that have helped me and helped me grow and given me
yeah,
experiences that I would have never had
yeah,
without those relationships.
yeah. No, I mean that's the thing is that I think that um the it'll be interesting to talk to this next generation of entry level master's students, um, 5, 10 years down the road. Um, if they talk about the experiences that they've had, or if they're still so focused on like, I got to be at the next job to get this paid, or I got to do this. I mean, um, I'm not sure that the whole relationship thing gets pushed a whole lot um, anymore, and it's more clinically sanitized. Maybe I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the it's so focused on these rotations, and then you get this internship, and you might have develop a relationship with that person and stuff, but it's all about like the next job or whatever. And we would look at things like, hey, this looks like a cool place to go because I get to work with this person or that person or whatever. And that's the situation I have here at Eastern is really cool because um, I have relationships with pretty much all the coaches, and the AD is about the same age I am. So we have a great relationship, and that's what I enjoy coming in here for. Is that it is very relationship based, even at the high school level. Um, to that you're part of this group, And I
Mhm.
think that's where we all want to belong somewhere.
Right.
But it'll be interesting talking to these um, new athletic trainers to see if that's still a focal point or not
Mhm.
with that. Maybe in some situations, but it just seems like at the college level, there's so much turnover anymore with athletic trainers
Mhm.
that I don't know if there's a whole lot of relationship building going on with that. So anyway, it's just what it is.
Mhm.
So let's get into let's talk a little bit because we're getting close on time here, at least for me. Maybe not you, but let's talk about what you're doing, kind of this transition of what you're doing now. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so just going back a 10-second history of my experience professionally. Um, at Wyoming, was an assistant athletic trainer for a couple of years, was an associate level athletic trainer for a
Right.
couple of years, associate director of sports medicine, and then 2018 was director of sports medicine. And so mathematically, that makes it 6 years I was doing that, and came to a point where,
And probably during the toughest time ever to do that.
yeah, COVID was, and I hate to say that word, but um, it changed the profession in a lot of ways and
Yeah.
made um, changed the way we think about things, the way we do things, and that was probably the toughest couple of years of my career, and especially being in an administrative position where you're trying to weigh the needs of the student athletes and making that the priority, but you also have this aspect of identity of our student athletes, knowing that sport plays such an important role of it. And yeah, it was a tough period of time, and that was early on in my time as director. And um, we always talked about the new normal, and um, the new normal is tough for us all. And
Yeah.
there's been other changes in college athletics that are challenging now, and I don't want to get into that at all because that's um, not important as much as it is me realizing that it was time for a change. And so um, I resigned my position as director of sports medicine. That was effective. My last day was June 30th. And I had applied for a series of different athletic training jobs. I even had one facilities administrator job at a university that I was offered. Um, but nothing seemed right. But wanting to still be able to help people, and was recently hired with Athletic Training Solutions, and I'm leaving for Columbus, Ohio, here middle of next week to start a new adventure. Working at a construction site. It'll be a site with about 500 workers, and just so excited about the opportunity to take what I've learned clinically, but also dealing with people. Because again, we've hit on this several times: the
Yeah.
ability to connect and work with people. Um, I'm so excited to totally take this to a different demographic. And um, yeah, I don't know the last time that I've had this excitement and smile talking about work and change with it. And so um, it's huge to have the opportunity to continue doing what I've been doing, just in a different venue. And looking forward to the next series of challenges and being able to, again, communicate and um, build new relationships with those that are on site as the construction employees and those on the management side, and trying to bring those groups together, kind of like we always did with coaches and athletes, trying to have the same goal and um, being able to help. And so I'm excited.
No, that's awesome because I think that's the thing is that, like, just what we talked about is that um, there's a whole population out there that we can serve as athletic trainers that um, that have no clue that it's cost effective, it's progressive, it is preventative. That's the other thing that we talk about, but how we apply that in different populations, I think, is extremely important. And we've all seen it. I mean, the neighbor that's a construction worker or works in a warehouse or something like that that has my back. I mean, my neighbor next door to me is he's a farmer, and he was having back issues, and he's talking to me about it, and I go, well, I might be able to help you out with that. And he goes, really? You can help me out with that? I'm like, well, it's no different than a lot of athletes that I see, what you're doing, how you're doing stuff. I mean, you're lifting 100-pound bales of straw or hay or whatever, and you're talking about you may need just a few tweaks here with your back. So, I mean, those are people that we can help, and sometimes you wonder at the college level, and I'll admit this. I mean, towards the end of my college career, I wondered if people were actually hearing what I was saying, and people talk about, sometimes you have to have a different voice. And I think for the most part, coaches and players, athletes were listening to what I was saying. It's administrators and other people that were like trying to prove a value to that. They're just, and especially now, and this, I mean, it's they're trying to figure out how to survive, let alone worry about sports medicine or
Mhm.
athletic training from that standpoint. And so you want to just be in a place where you feel like you can make a difference and earn a living. Let's face it,
Mhm. Yep.
we're all about that. I mean, and you're at a point in your life where all your kids are out of the nest for the most part,
Mhm. Yep.
and it's time to start living not saying he didn't live the good life before, but it's time to really, like, just like what I talked about, do what's best for you.
Yep.
And you're doing that now. And I think that's the thing. That's where I feel like for me, it provides opportunity to do the things I want to do. So that's why I'm busier now than I ever was,
Mhm.
um, with my stuff, which, by the way, I talked to Tony Cox last night. I told him that you're moving back to the Midwest. He needs some PRN help. So, he said Columbus is not that far. He'd hook you up on the east side of Indiana on some PRN work.
Okay.
And so, I said, well, if Scott feels like he wants to make that drive, then he's got your number. He can call you. But
Okay.
but that's what I mean, is that you can decide now,
Mhm.
basically what you want to do with some stuff, and that's powerful, especially when you've been in the college level where your your whole life was circling around um travel schedules
Mhm.
and practice times and practice on holidays and um like, I'm not gonna I gotta we're gonna open Christmas presents on Christmas Eve because I have a Christmas Day practice,
Mhm.
stuff like that you're not going to be necessarily faced with anymore.
Right.
And um I know that's what it was for me. I mean, Sunday, and in Indiana, there's not at the high school level, there's not any events on Sunday. So you always have Sunday
Mhm.
to do things with your family, go to, do church activities, whatever it is. Sundays are now pretty much, if I want to come in and treat somebody Sunday afternoon, if I feel like I need to, I make that decision, not some coach or whatever. I mean, that was always the thing with me with basketball, was that during basketball season, because we played Saturday, Tuesday, we always had Sunday practices, which were supposed to be film sessions and recovery days and stuff, but they always ended up being 3 or 4 hours at the arena. And I was like, I could, there's stuff I'd rather do on a Sunday than
Mhm.
come into this. So yeah, well, that's really, really cool, Scott. I mean, that's, um, like I said, I'm every now and then I'm in the Columbus area, so
Okay.
uh, have to hit you up uh, if you're around. But
Very
yeah,
good.
anything else? Any advice that you'd want to give somebody? That's what I always tell them, like young athletic trainers, that if they're paying attention to us old dudes, what advice would you give them?
Don't shy away from the hard conversations. Um, and I think I learned that a long time ago, that the concept of conflict, um, I think we're misguided with, and we have these preconceptions that conflict is bad. And so if we can address those issues when we have concerns early on with coaches and athletes, and have those tough conversations, I think we realize really quickly how close to being on the same page that we are with those people that we're having a conflict with. And just working through those, because at the end of the day, I don't think anybody woke up that morning going, I'm going to see how bad I can piss off Scott today.
Yeah.
And I think everybody is trying to move forward, doing the best that they can, and just giving some grace to each other. And even more importantly than that, giving grace to yourself is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where a lot of it, the young ones they don't give enough grace to themselves. You know, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect every time. We weren't perfect. We had to learn from a lot of stuff, and it's, if you early on, if you learn that, then you're going to enjoy your career a lot more with that. But yeah. Well, listen, it's been a great conversation. I've got to do a little bit of work now too. So, but I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast, and this is a great way to kick off season 3. And I think if I get the right people on, it's going to be a great season.
Awesome.
If I can just fit interviews in whenever I can, but I think I can, so I'll be okay. So we've gone off the roll with Scott Knerr. I want to thank Scott for coming on the podcast today. It was really great to sit down and talk to him. We really have not had a chance to do a whole lot of that. When we do, we have a great conversation, and I knew that he would be a great guest to have on to kick off this new season. So this new season is going to be interesting. I have a list of people that I want to bring on the podcast. If I can get them, like I said at the end of the podcast, that will be awesome. If I can't, then I'm going to move on. But I think that there's lots of stories to tell out there. And there's some great stories, both from Ball State athletic trainers and from non-Ball State athletic trainers. And that's what I'm committed to, is getting these stories for you guys as an audience to listen to. Maybe learn a few things. Maybe even some of our younger athletic trainers who may be interested in kind of the way things used to be done, and hear somebody else's story might inspire them. And that's really kind of the premise of all this. So be on the lookout. Again, it may not be as consistent as it has been in the past, but it will be up there and available when I can get things done. Hope you enjoyed this one. You can always give us feedback on Twitter, on Off the Roll Pod 1, or on the email, which is offtherollpodcast@gmail.com, or reach out to me on my personal Facebook page. There may be some other things that are coming up. You might hear a few commercials in here a little bit. That seems to be the trend of podcasts. The podcast platforms are now requiring some type of membership or payment to them to post your podcast. So we have to generate a little revenue to possibly do that. So sorry about that. We all try to avoid stuff that has commercials, but we'll try to make it as commercial free as possible through the meat of everything, if that's the direction that we go. Otherwise, hope everybody has a great day, and thanks for listening to Off the Roll.